Well, we're going to be continuing in Hebrews today. We're in Hebrews chapter 11 as a reminder. We'll be looking at verses 21 and 22. We're going to jump ahead a little bit and round out, I think, the example of the patriarchs at this point. We'll see Jacob's faith in verse 21 and Joseph's faith in verse 22. So when we think about Jacob, let me just read those first. It says, "By faith Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones." So these are examples of men who are both faithful to the very end. Jacob's faith is on display here. It's recorded in, his death is recorded in Genesis chapter 48. And at his death, he blessed Joseph's sons. He had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, who had been adopted by Jacob back in chapter 48, verse 5. So his blessing on them and his adoption would ensure a future inheritance for them in Israel. We see him then bow and worship and reverence. What he's doing here is he's demonstrating full faith that God's going to keep his promise to provide a land for his family. And he's keeping that faith in God's promise right to the end of his life. He's making arrangements at the end of his life to accommodate what he knows and is convinced that God's going to do. We see something similar happen in Joseph's life in verse 22. Also, when he was dying, he could have been buried in Egypt with great honors. He had been the second in command over Egypt, had helped them survive a dreadful famine. He could have possibly been buried in a prominent pyramid in the Valley of Kings in Egypt there, but he chose not to. He was dying in faith that God would keep his promise to establish Israel and his family in the land that he had promised him. That's what Joseph is doing here. So in an act of faith, anticipating that Israel would be back in the land that God had promised them, he was buried in that land. He had his bones taken to Israel, to the land of Canaan, and buried there as a final act of faith. So both of these are examples to us of being faithful to the end. I know that's my prayer, that I would be faithful to the very end, and I hope it's your prayer too. We can even say, looking at these two guys, Jacob and Joseph, that their faith was beyond the end, since they were making arrangements that impact beyond their own death, things that are going to happen even after they are gone, anticipating that the promise would be kept. So in this chapter, I've been talking a lot about living in light of his coming. This reminds us that we need to be living in light of his coming all the way to the end. So brothers and sisters, we know, and the Bible affirms and tells us, that Jesus could come at any moment, perhaps even today. Or he could choose to be patient for another 1,000 years. And that's not God not keeping his promise, but that is God being patient. So whether it's later today or 1,000 years from now, let's make it our resolve to choose faith over doubt and to live in light of his coming, really until we no longer live. May that be our promise. May that be perhaps the legacy we leave behind us, that we were faithful to the very end. God bless you, brothers and sisters, and press on in your faith in the Lord.